By 1970, London was a city defined by its technical achievements. The Apollo space missions were standard news, pop culture was becoming a global export, and the metropolis operated with the peak efficiency of a modern scientific age. This era was marked by a distinct confidence. With the space age in full swing, the prevailing sentiment was that modern technology had effectively rendered the superstitions of the past obsolete. Yet, in the middle of North London sat a 50-acre collapse of that progress. Highgate Cemetery had been largely abandoned for decades, leaving its Victorian tombs to be swallowed by ivy. It was a massive, rotting city of the dead that stood in direct opposition to the bustling city surrounding it. When humans move from a structured, geometric environment into a space defined by decay and isolation, the senses begin to override logic. In these conditions, the brain stops prioritizing rational thought and instead enters a state of high physiological alert. At the cemetery gates, the logic of the 1970s hit a physical wall. Proximity to such deep, gothic ruin creates a baseline of anxiety that makes even the most grounded individuals susceptible to panic. This shift began with a trickle of bizarre reports in the local press. People walking past the cemetery at night described seeing a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes staring from between the bars. Others claimed they were suddenly struck by a localized, paralyzing cold. The fear intensified when the police began finding the bodies of local foxes within the graveyard. They hadn't just been killed, they appeared to have been completely drained of blood. When faced with a series of unexplained, eerie anomalies, the human brain instinctively searches for a unifying pattern. This is a survival mechanism. We invent a single, terrifying story to connect isolated events and make them feel predictable. In isolation, a few letters and dead animals are minor local news. But together, they provided a framework for a collective, citywide anxiety that was about to find its focus. Two self-styled occult experts, David Farrant and Sean Manchester, recognized the potential of this growing fear. They used the cemetery as a stage, positioning themselves as the only men capable of handling the supposed threat. They used the press to add layers of specific lore to the rumors. They transformed a vague, shadowy figure into a tangible villain, claiming the graveyard was being haunted by an undead king vampire brought to London from Wallachia in the 1800s. This flowchart illustrates how a rumor gains momentum. A wild claim is published to sell papers. The public reads it in print and assumes it must be true, and that validation generates even more reports. The cycle repeats, scaling up fear. Their rivalry turned this loop into a public spectacle. Manchester demanded a public execution, while Farrant was arrested at midnight, found inside a tomb with a wooden stake. By treating these theatrical claims as headline news, the press actively built a monster. For a terrified public, the line between urban legend and a physical threat had been erased. Everything converged on Friday, March 13, 1970. A local television station broadcast a special on the vampire, broadcasting the hunter's most extreme claims to the entire city. The hysteria was no longer contained to letters and debates, it mobilized into a physical force. Within hours of the broadcast, hundreds of people armed with stakes, garlic, and crosses descended on the cemetery gates. The police tried to hold a perimeter, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The mob climbed the walls and swarmed through the graveyard in the pitch black, desperate to find and kill the creature. On this night, the thin veneer of the modern world broke. A city that was leading the world in aerospace and technology had successfully reverted to a medieval crusade. While the police eventually cleared the crowds, the panic didn't dissipate. The damage inside the cemetery continued to mount for months. Terrified residents began taking justice into their own hands. They smashed open sealed family vaults, dragged innocent corpses out of their coffins, and drove stakes through their chests. Despite the carnage, there was no evidence of a vampire. The event was a psychological phenomenon, fueled by media sensationalism and two men competing for fame. The true damage to Highgate was physical and human-led, as residents turned their own neighborhood into a literal hunting ground. The threat wasn't a monster, it was the breakdown of reason. The Highgate Panic is more than just a 1970s ghost story. It's a case study in the unchanging nature of human psychology. Scientific progress and digital communication can't permanently overwrite our primal instincts. We are still hardwired to see patterns in the dark and to find comfort in shared, even if irrational, fears. It only takes one shadow, one rumor, and a few drops of blood for any society to abandon modern logic and believe in monsters again.